I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Currents. 9 years later, a powerful look at some of the unhealed wounds of 9/11.
As the people with history who had to endure discrimination and prejudice and bigotry, it's now our role to not allow these same things to happen.
Bishop DiMarzio goes into the deep to share his thoughts.
It's a wound that is hard to heal. We've done a very good job of it as a community here, but it still hurts.
And a priest who witnessed the aftermath firsthand gives us his eyewitness.
It was shock. It was like in a battle zone.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. Matt McClure has the night off. Tonight, we're taking a look back as we look ahead to tomorrow, the 9th anniversary of the September 11th terror attacks. But we begin with an issue that is dominating the headlines today, the controversy over the proposed Islamic center near Ground Zero. The imam behind the Cordoba house says the center, which will include a mosque, will be built. Many of the people who are in favor of the center say those protesting against it are being intolerant and at worst bigots. One thing is clear, 9 years after the attacks, the wounds are still very deep for Americans of all faiths. The terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001 impacted millions of lives. The families and friends of the victims of 9/11, the soldiers fighting overseas, and countless American citizens. But we often forget about the impact 9/11 had on one group in particular.
I'm a born Muslim. I'm an American. Over the last 9 years after 9/11, everything changed. We were looked down as terrorists all the time. We faced different things. We were called on different things. We've been discriminated.
Well, of course, when somebody accuses of something you're not, it hurts emotionally and mentally.
What did the people do to Timothy McVeigh when he blew up the Oklahoma building? He killed thousands. I don't see them demanding to burn the Bible, are they?
The Muslim community and the immigrant community in general were victims of 9/11.
Monsignor Ronald Marino heads up the Office of Migration for the Diocese of Brooklyn.
The whole anti-immigrant fervor that's born in the United States was born on that day, as far as I'm concerned.
Father Kevin Madigan of St. Peter's Church in Lower Manhattan was only a few blocks away when the towers collapsed. He has been outspoken in his support for the Cordoba House, the Islamic center near Ground Zero, which has recently stirred up controversy.
This is America. This is the land where minorities are respected. This is the land where we welcome people regardless of religion, race, or creed.
America is not at war against Muslims. America is at war, and actually we are at war against terrorism.
Father Madigan says Catholics in particular should take notice of discrimination against Muslims.
Catholic religion was treated as being suspect, as being foreign. The bigots were saying that the Pope was going to come over and run this country to his viceroy, that Catholicism's beliefs were antithetical to American democracy.
Similarly, many Muslims insist much of the feeling against Islam is based on misinformation.
People also, like when they learned about Islam and they learned about Muslims, they don't overreact or discriminate.
Read. Get more education on it. Muslims are not terrorists. They are as much as human beings. They have a human being heart like everybody else, and they are Americans.
I never met a terrorist, ever, in my whole years as a priest. And I dealt with plenty of people who were fleeing persecution in their own country to come here to the United States as refugees.
Every day I wake up, I have a 3-month-old son, and I thank God my son is born in this beautiful country.
But there are those who hope some good has come out of this tragedy.
I'm glad that there is a lot of Muslim awareness in the American society, and locally people, the American people, they are now recognizing the Muslims, they're recognizing their sentiments.
And Father Madigan points out that Catholics are presented with a unique opportunity.
It's now our role to not allow these same things to happen to a new wave of people.
We need to lead the pack in making sure the message gets out that the one who we serve, our God, spoke against hate and intolerance.
This week, several U.S. bishops condemned bigotry against Muslims. In a statement, they said, quote, "All acts of intolerance aimed at a religious community should find no place in our world, let alone in our nation, which is founded on the principles of religious freedom." We'll hear from Brooklyn's own Bishop DiMarzio a little later on in the program. But when we return, we'll have the day's headlines, including reaction from the Muslim world about the planned Quran burning in Florida. But first, what do Catholics near Ground Zero think about the proposed Islamic center? We spoke with people who worship at St. Joseph's Church, just a couple of blocks away.
I'm not against it. I feel people have a right to express their religion. That's what this country's all about.
No, too close to the tragedy that we all had on 9/11.
They have the right to build it there. They have as much right to build it there as anyone else that gets the requisite permits.
I have no problem with it being built near Ground Zero. I believe that we should be tolerant and inclusive.
No, definitely not. I totally disagree with it. I mean, especially what happened here on September 11th.
We're able to worship in our own church, so they should be able to worship in theirs.
I just think the mosque should just go a little bit further. That's my opinion.
Where do you draw the line? You know, it's always not going to be appropriate to some people anywhere. It could be too close to a firehouse or too close to some other place, so I think they should.
Welcome back to Currents. I'm Francesca Maxime. Coming up just a bit later, an eyewitness account of the aftermath of 9/11. But first, let's look at the day's headlines. The Muslim world has reacted strongly to a Florida pastor's plan to burn the Quran, even though he said yesterday he would cancel the burning. Across Pakistan, Muslims took to the streets in protest. At one rally, an imam told a crowd of 200 that postponing the burning was not enough. A French news agency quoted the imam as saying, "We will continue to raise our voice so that it never happens again." Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, several hundred demonstrators stormed a NATO compound. At least 9 people, including 5 police officers, were injured in that incident. And after announcing yesterday that he was canceling the Quran burning, fundamentalist pastor Terry Jones says it may still happen. Jones says he had reached an agreement to cancel the burning if the proposed Islamic center near Ground Zero were moved. The New York imam at the center of that project says no such deal was made and that he had not even spoken with Jones. From the Vatican, meanwhile, the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See says the threat to burn the Quran is damaging the image of the United States. Miguel Diaz says in a statement, the deliberate destruction of any holy book is an abhorrent act. Turning now to Belgium, a new report shows there were 475 incidents of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church over a 40-year period, and 13 victims committed suicide. The head of an independent commission monitoring complaints says almost every Catholic institution in Belgium at one time harbored abuse. Meanwhile, a court has ruled that documents seized in a police raid on church buildings back in June cannot be used by prosecutors. Back in this country, federal authorities have charged a North Carolina man in a plot to bomb an abortion clinic. Tanika Smith has that story.
26-year-old Justin Moose of Concord could face up to 20 years in prison if convicted on federal charges that he conspired to plan a bombing at an unidentified women's clinic that performs abortions. Federal agents say Moose, a self-proclaimed radical, used social networking sites like Facebook to project his anti-abortion views. Agents found messages like, "Save a life, shoot an abortionist." According to federal documents, Moose also described himself as the Christian counterpart of Osama bin Laden. According to Moose's Facebook page, he attended Royal Oaks Baptist Church in Kannapolis. "We went by the church today, but no one was there." A family member of Moose told us off camera that he is not a monster, but a Christian with strong views.
You cannot be pro-life and then at the same time advocate violence against another person. It's simply incompatible.
Although agents found another message from Moose saying, "To all the feds watching me, you can't stop what is in motion." David Haynes with the Charlotte Catholic Diocese, a pro-life organization, hopes his arrest has foiled those plans.
But there is never any call whatsoever for violence against someone who you disagree with.
That is Tanika Smith reporting. And finally, ahead of the beatification of Cardinal Newman, news that the Vatican is looking into a possible second miracle in his sainthood cause. In a new BBC documentary on Newman, a doctor says he was headed to Mexico City to investigate. Pope Benedict will beatify Cardinal Newman during his trip to the United Kingdom next week, and the Net will have complete coverage of the Pope's trip. Stay tuned, though, as we continue with a special edition of Currents. Coming up, we'll hear Bishop DiMarzio's thoughts on 9/11. But first, more on the proposed Islamic Center from men and women who worship just steps from Ground Zero.
Ignorance is playing the biggest role in this. A lot of people are misinformed. They are fearful, and their fear and ignorance is guiding their opinion.
I think it could be, and it shouldn't.
Political opportunism is playing a role in this debate. And I think that the politicians, fringe politicians from maybe from all sides, have usurped the debate for their own good, for their own benefit.
This debate, I think, is turning into a debate of hate and religious intolerance, and that's going against Christ's message directly.
Welcome back to our special broadcast commemorating 9/11. Well, every Friday, we go into the deep with Bishop DiMarzio to discuss issues facing the church and the diocese. And as we heard earlier, one issue that is looming large is the planned Islamic Center near Ground Zero. That's just one of the topics Matt and I discussed with the bishop when we sat down to talk about 9/11 and its aftermath.
Bishop DiMarzio, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Good to be here again.
Well, it's hard to believe that 9 years have passed since the attacks of September 11th, 2001. First of all, just your thoughts about that.
Well, I think if you're from New York, the metropolitan area has a real special significance because hardly anyone didn't have someone they knew who was affected, either died or a friend or someone. We recognized how this was, this megalopolis was a small village in many ways, with so many people dying. I think it's a wound that is hard to heal, and I think we've done a very good job of it as a community here, but it still hurts. It still hurts to try to understand why people would do something like that. And I think this is still lingering. It's still part of our culture right now.
And Bishop DiMarzio, a lot of people have said that, as with when John F. Kennedy was shot, they remember distinctly where they were and what they were doing on that day. What were you doing that day, and what are your remembrances of that day?
Actually, I was in Washington, D.C. We're at a bishops' conference meeting, an executive board meeting of the bishops. I was on the executive board at that time. So we were there, and then we also had the problem in Washington, the Pentagon, and so we heard was jet planes overhead, and it was something you're not going to forget.
Yeah, it's one of those days you never ever forget about where you were, what you were doing on that particular day. There's also been here recently a lot of controversy regarding the area around where the attacks took place in Manhattan, of course. I'm talking about the Islamic Center, the Islamic Community Center, which would contain a mosque as part of it there, just a couple of blocks away from the site at Ground Zero. What are your thoughts about that controversy?
Well, this particular controversy probably is mixing two different things. First, there was the issue of the historical status of that building. And all of a sudden, that was lost because the Historic Sites Commission, or whatever the name of it actually is, had responsibility for that. All of a sudden, then they have responsibility for building the mosque now. Well, there were two separate things. Either it's an historical building that cannot be touched, or it's a site that can be turned into anything. You can't build a church wherever you want either, You have to have certain requirements, space, parking, etc., etc., etc. That's the rules of the city. I mean, the city or wherever you are, different cities. So I think we should separate it out. At the other side of it is, yes, houses of worship should be able to be built wherever there is the adequate space and zoning requirements for them. I think we're not building too many churches here in Brooklyn and Queens. We did build one church, and we had quite a time with the requirements of the city for the space and et cetera, for the parking spaces allocated to it. Well, it's the same with every place of worship, that there are certain requirements, and it's not, but we should separate that from prejudice, saying, well, we can't have a house of worship because we don't agree with the tenets of the religion, or because we think somehow they had something to do with 9/11. You've got to separate it out, and everything got conflated, and you had a lot of hard feelings, and still it isn't resolved.
And it's not just near Ground Zero in Staten Island and Sheepshead Bay.
Sure.
There were also some other mosque proposals that have been met with some controversy, even in our own community here within the Diocese of Brooklyn. What do you say to people who live in those neighborhoods?
Well, I would say the same thing. If there's space, if you can adequately have assembly of a certain amount of people, every church I'm into, every auditorium says only a certain amount of people are allowed. Well, you've got to do that. So these are requirements of public safety. So you've got to meet them. You've got to meet the zoning requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's not easy. And places of congregation, of anything, restaurants, et cetera, all have all of these things. So we've got to separate it out. One are the rules that go with public safety. Secondly, are the prejudices that go against particular religions, and that's what we have to eliminate them. That we shouldn't be part of. This other side, you can't have one saying you're putting them together. They're separate issues.
Okay. All right. Well, Bishop DiMarzio, thank you so much for being here once again. We really appreciate your time.
Okay.
Thank you. When we return, a New York City priest shares his memories of 9/11. We have that and more when we come back, so please stay with us.
I think he'd be very disappointed on the way things has gone for the Muslim people. They're not all guilty of terrorists or anything like that.
He would want to see it built.
Christ is all embracing. It's just location that we have a problem with.
He wouldn't be happy. He's all about peace. So he's forgiven, but it's hard for us humans to forgive.
With sadness. I believe he was a tolerant person.
I don't believe he would be happy to see the hatred that is coming out from so many people.
Christ stands for love, so I think that answers the question.
This weekend is a time of reflection and remembrance for so many of us. Some of the most powerful memories belong to those who went out of their way to minister to victims on September 11th, 2001. Just ask Father Gerald Murray. He's a former Navy chaplain who now serves at St. Vincent de Paul Parish in Chelsea, not far from Ground Zero. And tonight, he is our eyewitness.
It was shock. It was like in a battle zone. And that was like going next to an inferno or something hellish. The lights were all out, the power was down, but there was the illumination from the fire. I was in the rectory. I was actually shaving, getting ready for the day at the church, and I was listening to Curtis and Kuby on the radio, and they were talking about a small plane. They thought it hit the World Trade Center. Having gone up on the roof, I knew this was really bad. I could see the huge smoke trail coming out of the north tower. The second tower was also on fire, and I thought about what I should do. And I thought, I'm going to go down there to assist as a priest. I was able, amidst the traffic, to get down there pretty quickly. And the first sign, aside from seeing the buildings on fire, was seeing all these medical personnel out on the street and realizing that they were geared up for the inevitable casualties. I saw one priest at St. Vincent's Hospital on the sidewalk, along with doctors and nurses. They had stretchers and medical equipment ready to receive the injured. And I asked the priest if he could use some help. He said yes. As the day went on, they didn't bring up that many. After the buildings collapsed, it was more rescue personnel rather than people who had been working or in the area at the time of the attack. Later on, we realized that was the good news about how many people had been successfully evacuated. What really struck me was the days following, I went as a volunteer priest over to the Armory on Lexington and 21st to be a spiritual counselor to family members who were coming to find information about their deceased. And I remember one guy in particular who lost his brother, and they were looking for his name on the list, and indeed, he was a victim. And it's one of those things. He had been attending a meeting at the World Trade Center, breakfast meeting in the restaurant. He was there that day. As a young priest, you think about, when will I ever face the need to bring God's mercy to victims of a great tragedy? So I was glad in that sense that I was able to be there, and I thank the Lord for that, putting me on earth at this time. The reminder was given to all of us at that point. If you don't love your fellow man, this is the result. So anything I can do as a priest to promote God's love and His justice, that's a 9/11 fruit that hopefully can be widespread.
Father Gerald Murray. Well, that is it for tonight. On Monday, we'll bring you full coverage of this weekend's commemorations. In the meantime, remember, we are always online at currentsny.net, and you can also check us out on Facebook. Until next time, I'm Francesca Maxime. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night and a good weekend.